Hello, it's Tammy. Today I'm going to share with you some information on women's health. It's a request that was sent in to me, and it is a rather broad topic. So I'm going to start by covering four of the five because breast cancer is one that I've talked about a couple of other times, and I can go into each one more specifically in additional videos, but I wanted to kind of briefly touch on these particular four as a way of opening the door for additional conversations. So today it's on heart disease, osteoporosis, depression, as well as autoimmune disorders. And yes, that is a rather broad category of conditions, but nonetheless, it's women compose 75% of the diagnoses in that arena. Heart disease attacks both men and women. It knows no gender. As well as osteoporosis, although osteoporosis has a tendency to be more prevalent in women. Depression obviously knows both sexes as well, but we see women dealing with it, quite frankly. And it is, interestingly enough, tied very closely to any number of addictions, more than you might believe. So on that note, like I said, breast cancer is one that I've discussed already, and I'm happy to go into it further with anybody. And if I come up with other ideas in that arena, it's not like a closed door. It's just one that I don't think that's necessary to get into today. But on the topic of breast cancer, we go into osteoporosis. That's the one I want to begin with. And typically as young girls, we're told to eat, to drink our milk and get our calcium, and so that we can prevent the breakdown of our bones and keep our bones strong. But interestingly, if you are predisposed to it, if it runs in your family, then you are predisposed to it. But as I've also mentioned before, it doesn't necessarily have to run in the family for it to affect you. And even though we've been coached in such a way to get our calcium, to get our vitamin D, to get exercise, to prevent this condition, and they say it is preventable, there's a number of factors that go into this that I would raise questions on as far as being preventable, unless you actually do something other than just take your calcium supplements, as well as your vitamin D supplements. With those two mentioned, vitamin D is picked up by a receptor in the body for the appropriation and production of hormones, okay? The vitamin D receptor is a chronically defective receptor for so many people. I mean, if you think about the United States alone, we are epidemically low on vitamin D, and no matter how much you take, no matter how much time in the sun you spend, most of us are low in vitamin D. So there's a necessary step to actually activate that vitamin D receptor in order to get the vitamin D in so that you can actually utilize the calcium. That's just it. It's very difficult to get calcium in. Calcium and magnesium compete when we take them in supplement form. When we get it in a food-based supplement or in food itself, it's easier for our body to actually begin to assimilate it. My head is racing right now, so bear with me because there's a lot of information I want to say in regards to just these two nutrients alone, and then I'll get back into the osteoporosis. But like I say, vitamin D is necessary for calcium assimilation. Vitamin D receptor, when it is not functioning properly, will adversely affect the thyroid. When the thyroid is affected, and it doesn't mean you're either hypo or hyper, it just means it's been affected. It's not functioning optimally, and you may eventually see thyroid issues. There's another thing, well, I will get into that in just a moment with vitamin D, but with the thyroid, once the thyroid is not functioning optimally, the parathyroid is now affected. Okay, parathyroid gland requires calcium, and it actually what is responsible for dispensing the calcium and what helps in our fat metabolism, because calcium is necessary for that. So like I say, to consume calcium in a supplement form, and yes, there are lots out there that contain vitamin D. They also may have magnesium in them and maybe even vitamin C, because we know that all those go together. But the issue is, if the vitamin D receptor alone is not functioning, then your ability to assimilate and absorb that calcium appropriately has now been hindered. So, like I say, there are ways to do this to actually support that. I'm going to just tell you straight up right now, bitter orange, also known as Citrus aurantium, is a very good oil for that. For the assimilation of vitamin D. You can get that in petitgrain, you can use it in neroli, so there's it comes in different forms, but you want to make sure that the Latin term says Citrus aurantium, and then there's different distillation processes create different oils, actually, different concentrations. So there again, it's going to vary on what your needs are, on which one you select, but just off the top, that's the best oil you can select to activate that vitamin D receptor and begin to support calcium absorption, support the thyroid in one of the most simplest ways, as well as the immune system. But like I said, we'll get into that. So in the area of osteoporosis, I'm going to rein it in here a little bit. So osteoporosis, believe it or not, is actually linked to it's linked to the same genetic issues that are linked to breast cancer. In fact, the CYP gene complex that is necessary for metabolizing estrogen, and if there's adaptations on those with those enzymes, depending on the rest of your genetic sequence, you could end up developing osteoporosis. I had a little brain fart there. So, like I said, my head's racing, so bear with me here. So that's, interestingly enough, the link. And there again, it also has to do a lot with the vitamin D and the calcium. I said a lot earlier with regards to fat metabolism. There is a link there as far as obesity is concerned. As I've mentioned before, adipose tissue is part of the endocrine system, and there are several hormones that are produced in that tissue. But there again, if you start with the vitamin D being out, and no matter how much supplementation you take, now here's the thing: if you actually use the Citrus aurantium and you take your vitamin D3 supplement, okay, you're better off using D3. If you take the vitamin D3 supplement and use your Citrus aurantium, now you're actually supporting the body's use of vitamin D, and you're actually helping to re-regulate the very basic endocrine system, because once the thyroid is affected, they all start to go out, okay? That's really what happens. The body's consistently seeking to regulate and restore wellness, and even though it doesn't do it in the most optimal ways because it's lacking the proper nutrients and the proper instructions due to genetic adaptations, we end up with a decline in health. And not to complicate things, it's really not that complicated. It's very simple in the sense that when one system goes out, the entire system goes out because we lack the proper nutrition. And it has nothing to do with the quality of our food as much as it has to do with the body's ability to utilize nutrients. And this is the reason why I strongly encourage the use of essential oils, and more importantly, the bio-individual use of essential oils. So as I said a little while ago, Citrus aurantium works with vitamin D, right? It sounds great. Sounds like hey, we got this, we can do this, we can overcome. Well, let me just tell you this. Citrus aurantium also stimulates serotonin production. oops, if you have serotonin issues, and many people could, if you suffer from chronic migraines, if you struggle with insomnia, these are indications that serotonin is more than likely higher than it's needed to be. If you have anxiety, even though serotonin happens to be one of those ones that helps to kind of keep us calm and soothed, too much serotonin can crank you up and get you going. And so, like I say, depending on your genetic sequence, you may develop migraines, you may develop just regular, cluster headaches, which aren't any more fun than a migraine. Anxiety and sleep issues, just those three alone, could be an indicator of serotonin. And the citrus aurantium does stimulate serotonin production. So you now have to be aware of this, number one, and number two, know how to regulate that and actually help with the conversion into melatonin, actually help to bring the serotonin and counteract those serotonin levels. So see, this is where it gets into chemistry experiments and why even just taking medications doesn't do it for very long, because it keeps if you take an SSRI for depression, it keeps the serotonin in the brain, and therefore it doesn't allow it to be appropriated through the rest of the body. So it's really becoming now into understanding what your body is letting you know it needs. So vitamin D, yes. Too much serotonin, no. And this may mean that you only use the bitter orange types of oils for 4 to 6 weeks, and then you back off because you don't want to create serotonin spikes. You don't want to send yourself into migraines or high anxiety. You could also include ginger essential oil in that, because that'll actually help to regulate and reduce serotonin levels. So now you have a little bit of an idea of how that can work, because like I say, the body actually seeks to regulate itself. And so when one system goes out, the whole thing starts to fall apart, and we end up with a decline in health unless we use the essential oils that are bio-individually selected for you, and you actually regulate them. It means your medicine chest is full of essential oils. Okay, so what? You use them as you need them. What's the difference between that and a medicine chest full of pharmaceuticals and OTCs? There is no difference, except as far as quantity goes. But when you're talking about quality of health, there's an extraordinary difference. It's something that you can go in there and you can select and you can utilize to your advantage. And with the oils, especially when you use 3 or 4 at a time and no more than that, you now have created a systemic communication where you have cells communicating where maybe they weren't utilizing nutrients, where they may have been misusing them and creating more toxins. So on that note, when I talk about calcium supplementation, I keep it in the back on this side of my head. I hear heart disease and and calcium, hardening of the arteries. That's part of the reason why we have hardening of the arteries, is because the body's not utilizing the calcium properly. Yes, most people want to talk about, it's because you're overweight or your triglyceride levels are high. So you're potentially diabetic. I mean, we have all of these things that we want to blame, but the bottom line is a misuse of nutrients. And if you can get that calcium in and you can get it in a food-based form, you are doing your body an extraordinary favor. And if you include it with the essential oils, now you are, again, providing cells the nutrients that they need to function optimally. So food-based calcium. All right, so there's a couple of ways you can get that. You can get it in supplement form, but you need to make sure the label says food-based. I don't have the brands off the top of my head. There are other foods that you can actually eat that are exceptionally high in calcium. And I'm not talking dairy. I mean, it's reasonable thing to consider based on that's what we've been told all our life. But right now, I'm not going to promote dairy, not because it's animal-based and not because of the casein due to we talk about casein-free for autism, and not for any of that reason, because, folks, it actually triggers histamine reactions. And until you get your histamine in balance, and we're going to hear more about that here in just a bit, until you get the histamine in balance and the homocysteine is being converted properly, you're not benefiting your body by taking in pasteurized dairy. So no, dairy is not the option unless you're going to do raw. I do know in Europe that raw milk is highly encouraged for many people because of the availability of minerals, because calcium and magnesium are both readily available and readily used by the body. And from what I do understand, it is frequently used in the treatment of diabetes and obesity. So there you go. In this country, we have a problem with drinking raw milk, although I know plenty of people who do. And I am, and to me, it's a beneficial food, especially if you're supporting your body with the essential oils and you're actually helping the body to regulate the histamine. There is no problems for the heart with regards to fat, nothing when you drink raw and consume raw dairy, because and especially when you're combining it with the essential oils that are very specific to your body type and your genetic type, more importantly. So foods, chia seeds, a big one. Very good source of all your minerals, good source of calcium and magnesium in particular. Speaking of being epidemically low on nutrients, we are epidemically low on magnesium. So this would be a really beneficial food to consume, especially if you have digestive problems. And so helping to restore digestion, helping to cleanse the bowels. If you happen to have ulcerative colitis, this is an excellent food for helping to kind of solidify. I don't necessarily recommend it if your bowels are slow, because it will bind you up. So there are ways to get around that, and I may make that just another video, because like I said, I could sit here and talk the rest of the day as this all rolls together. And if you actually begin to email me and engage me in consultations, this is the kind of information, even more specifically to you, that you get. It gets very detailed. It can be very overwhelming. And that's the reason why I like to do these videos, because you can pause it, you can consider what I'm saying and come back to it. So chia seeds are great. Another good form besides our dark greens is maca root. Maca root is one that you don't want to take for very long. It's another one that you maybe want to consume for 4 to 6 weeks. It actually does help to restore the endocrine system. It supports the cardiovascular system. It's an exceptional food when it comes to depression. And so, that alone is good reason to consider this for even osteoporosis, because of the availability of the good fats and proteins, and especially the minerals, and just the overall wellness that it promotes, especially of the endocrine system. And osteoporosis, interestingly enough, is a condition that's directly linked to the endocrine system. Now we have, trying to think, another good food is raw cacao. That's raw chocolate for those us chocolate lovers. And raw cacao doesn't taste very good unless you want to mix it with, you can make like a hot chocolate out of it using an alternative milk like almond or hemp or coconut milk. And you can add a little bit of stevia in there, and now you've got a really delicious chocolate milk that is exceptionally high in minerals and very good for you, helps you to sleep, supports, again, mental wellness, a very good food for depression. So I've given you some ideas on a couple of oils in the area of osteoporosis. Another one would be chamomile romaine, as it actually helps with the conversion of homocysteine into cysteine, and the production of glutathione. It also helps in the regulation of the the metabolism of estrogen. So there again, you have a really good collection of oils to start with. Getting into the heart disease, chamomile roman's another, is, transitioning there. Chamomile roman helps with that. Like I said, it actually helps with the conversion of homocysteine to cysteine. When we have homocysteine issues and we're not metabolizing our amino acids properly, we tend to have high homocysteines. And yes, you can go on a vegan diet and completely eliminate homocysteine from your diet and benefit your health. And that might not be a bad idea. However, if you are a meat eater and you find yourself sourced and feeling good when you eat meat, maybe backing off for a while and just eating meat occasionally until you can actually help the body. Here, I'm going to make some food suggestions when it comes to heart disease, and this isn't based on what, it may seem like it's based on the current recommendations, but there is more systemic benefit to it that I will share with you. And one of those is walnuts. Now, we know we always hear it's good for our heart health. We hear about it as brain health. But I'm going to tell you straight up, when homocysteine isn't being converted to cysteine, the body tends to produce ammonia. There's a chemical in the body that we produce naturally called BH4. That's the acronym. BH4 is needed for neurotransmitter and hormone production. It feeds directly off the nitric oxide synthase gene complex. If there are defects on that complex and there's defects in the area of homocysteine and cysteine, you now are predisposed and you're set up for the heart disease. Now, when I say predisposed, this could be something that runs in the family, and you may have absolutely no indication of it until all of a sudden it hits, or you might be kind of like, slightly set up or not even at all. Because one of the things that we know is that our epigenome interacts with the environment on a daily basis, and given trauma, stress, diet, other chemicals that we consume, these can all trigger alterations within our genetics, and then all of a sudden you've got an issue. This is what happens with addiction, and this can be something that happens with addiction. Let me just qualify that, because it's not necessarily the only reason to addiction, but it can be. The same thing happens when you take a pharmaceutical or you take something and you have an adverse reaction. It is because the body's been triggered. Sometimes that happens on a level that we aren't even aware of. And those are the ones that we have to be cautious of, and that's where heart disease and a lot of these health conditions can absolutely come in. So walnuts is a good one because, number one, they scavenge ammonia from the body. Rosemary is another one because it scavenges peroxynitrite, which is a toxin that is created when nitric oxide synthase isn't functioning properly. If you are not producing enough BH4 from the get-go, and all you have is enough to scavenge the ammonia, because that's what BH4 also does, is it actually helps to scavenge the ammonia from the body. Now you don't have enough to make neurotransmitters and hormones, which can now set you up for depression and anxiety or any other potential health issue, a mental health issue, including insomnia. So again, these sound very complicated. When I interact with people, because I'm emotionally removed from it, I can kind of hear how this whole thing is working and then make the bio-individual selections and suggestions. So walnuts and rosemary, two excellent foods in the prevention of and protection of heart disease, as well as any respiratory issues for those two particular genetic complexes. Chamomile roman and cedarwood atlas would be very good with the elimination of toxins from the body. Now, walnuts also contain folate, as do beets. Folate is what we know as folic acid on a lot of supplement bottles, but there are natural sources of folate. You may be concerned with your digestion and think your digestion is out, and you more than likely are correct. Should you have indigestion or heartburn, that's an indication that the nitric oxide synthase is malfunctioning. And that is also an indication of low stomach acid. So you want to make sure that you get stomach acids. If you don't necessarily have that, but my suspicion is you're going to have some digestive enzyme concerns. So now you want to make sure you consume the digestive enzymes so that you can actually break down the folate properly, so that the folate itself, because folate is needed for the metabolism of amino acids, which is how the homocysteine begins to get converted into these various other chemicals. So folate is a very important food, and like I say, walnuts contain that, and that's the reason why walnuts are an exceptionally good food. I've had some people go, well, I don't like walnuts, what am I going to do? Like I say, there are other foods such as beets that do contain walnuts. I personally do not like beets. I have issues with folate, I know of, and so I will eat beet chips like there's no tomorrow, because they are exceptionally tasty, and they have the same benefits. So you can do the same thing with walnuts. You can toast them, you can roast them, you can mix them with other things. If you absolutely have an aversion to them, or you have what you believe is a sensitivity or allergy to them, that tells me there's a histamine. And again, as you can see, one of the reasons why I try to generalize as much as I do is because the broad sense of how this can go with everyone. This is why health is not a one-size-fits-all. It's just not. So it really depends on what you're presenting with, what your reactions are, what your body is doing and not doing, or even more so, how it's reacting is more important. When you start to talk to somebody who's not emotionally attached to your health, who's just there for you, and so when I say emotionally attached, I'm not close to it. You're too close to it. And when we're too close to our own situation, it's difficult to see. It's the bigger picture, right? I'll give you a really great example, an analogy. I love photography, and this last few months I've been taking a black and white photo class, which has been a lot of fun, and I've been learning how to develop negatives and prints. But it was interesting because I got so accustomed, even though I used to shoot film, I got so accustomed to the digital that, because the digital, it's an immediate crop, you can alter it right then and there. And even when I was shooting film before, I'd just slap it into Photoshop and then I'd make the adjustments. Well, in this particular class, we can't do that. We snap the picture and we make the print, and then you're like, ooh, I didn't mean to get all that. Well, what I realized is that you have to not just look at your subject, you have to look at the bigger picture, okay? You have to see things the way the camera sees it, and the camera sees everything that's in view. It's not just looking at your subject. And that's what I mean by emotionally detached. Your subject is your health. You're in your body. So to be emotionally detached means I can see the bigger picture. And plenty of other people can too. But what I'm wanting to do is get you in the thought process of realizing that, yes, we do want to be able to take care of ourselves. Yes, we want to reclaim our power and gain control over our health, because ultimately what we really want is a quality of life. And I want to help you get there. And so by providing you with a bird's eye view of what's really going on might be beneficial. So in the area of heart disease, like I say, it can get very big. It is a big problem for both men and women. And it has a lot to do with the way the body, again, is not using nutrients. So chamomile romaine and cedarwood atlas are very great for helping to eliminate the toxins and supporting the body to produce a very important antioxidant, glutathione. If you include something like holy basil essential oil into that, it actually supports the nitric oxide synthase. It helps with the production of SOD catalase, which is another anti-inflammatory process that the body naturally does. So here again, the body can do this if we give it the right instructions. Holy basil is not recommended for people who are currently using blood thinners. So, and interestingly enough, those who have thick blood, who need blood thinners, have problems on the nitric oxide synthase gene. So, as you can see how it's all related. So, blood thinners are a big deal, and understanding what oils you can and cannot use with blood thinners. Bergamot is a questionable one as well. Bergamot is exceptionally good for depression and mental health, as well as it actually stimulates the Krebs cycle, which is the breakdown of carbohydrates, fats, and metabolism. Carbohydrates, fats, and protein metabolism. And however, if you're using blood thinners or you're taking aspirin for that matter, not even prescription blood thinners, but using aspirin on a daily basis, you want to make sure you avoid these oils. Let me think here. Then there was depression, which I've said a couple of times. Depression is also linked to many addictions, as I mentioned. A lot of these health conditions, including depression, some of us are born this way. Some of us are born into a family that has it in the family history, and so you're already set up for it genetically. Or you may experience some form of trauma and or extraordinary amounts of stress, or be exposed to a chemical, whether it be a pharmaceutical, OTC, soap, food additive. I mean, we're exposed to these things every day, and any one of those things can potentially set you up and you don't even realize it. Histamine also factors into depression as well as heart disease, as does serotonin and dopamine. Again, all of these neurotransmitters actually work with the heart and they help to keep the heart healthy. Dopamine helps to regulate sodium, and serotonin helps to flush, works with the fluids too in the renal system. So these are reasons why we need to make sure that we're not just keeping these chemicals in our brain and that we're actually helping to, number one, inactivate, such as histamine needs to be inactivated because it can go over the top and develop extra tissue. So again, I could go on because it's very fascinating to me the way the body works, and how it's working for you is very important to me as well. And I could sit here and tell you all of these things and confuse the heck out of everybody who's listening or watching. So I invite you to engage me because your health matters. And I don't want anybody to be victimized by their health. It's okay to take your health back. Need to go into foods with regards to depression and some possible oils there. Foods for depression would be avocados. Avocados are exceptionally good at helping to keep the liver healthy. They are, a good source of fats, good source of B vitamins that actually help with the metabolism of carbohydrates. And they also stimulate dopamine production, as do pumpkin seeds. Cheese, if you want to get yourself some raw cheese and try your hand at that, would be an excellent one because cheese contains tyrosine, and tyrosine is needed for L-DOPA, which is the precursor for dopamine, and dopamine then gets converted to norepinephrine. So those are some. In fact, the word cheese actually means tyrosine. So it's one of the best sources of tyrosine that we have, and if you can get it in raw form, which I believe is becoming more and more available in the United States. I know it's here with us in Santa Fe. I've seen it in other locations around the country, so it's not a secret or difficult food item to find. You just have to kind of go more into your health food stores and or go to your local farmers if you've got dairy farmers in the area, because they're more than likely going to have raw dairy products. Oils for depression, there again, here's an interesting thing about depression. Really what causes depression, it could be any one of these neurotransmitters. It could be all of them for that matter. It could be a histamine issue. It could be, the fact that your histamine is going rampant in your body and it's not being inactivated properly. It could be dopamine. You could be low on dopamine. And Wellbutrin is a very popular and well-known antidepressant, and that is actually a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. That means it works with the dopamine. And then you have your SSRIs. So it really depends on really how you are presenting, is the word I want to use. that will give an indication as far as really what the depression is, if there is in fact, like I said, serotonin can, too much serotonin can actually cause anxiety, and an SSRI keeps it in the body. And interestingly enough, a lot of these SSRIs are also used in the area of anxiety. So just because one medication has a specific understood use doesn't mean it's not being used for other things. I know plenty of people who live with some form of anxiety and are on an SSRI. So there again, you see the relationship between serotonin and anxiety. So again, it depends on the neurotransmitter, and we can go back and forth with trying to juggle these neurotransmitters, or you can actually go in and affect the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal glands directly. The HPA axis is an incredibly important one, and being able to offset these neurotransmitters and help restore balance can be done without worrying about which neurotransmitter it is. So frankincense is a good one, as is Spanish marjoram. Both of those oils work directly with the hypothalamus and the pituitary. If you factor in chamomile romaine into that, again, is this one kind of just wants to makes its way through all of the women's health issues. You would benefit extraordinarily from that. Frankincense actually also deactivates histamine. It works with the and oh my goodness, I just drew a blank with the particular gene that is needed to deactivate histamine. But you don't need to know the gene so much as that there is a gene that deactivates histamine, and frankincense works directly on that gene. Then we get into helping to maybe possibly activate receptors within the endocannabinoid system. No, this isn't a push for cannabis. This is, and this is one of the reasons why Roman chamomile works so effectively for depression and anxiety, is because it actually interacts with the endocannabinoid system because it's high in beta-caryophyllene. Beta-caryophyllene is a constituent that is, it's actually a cannabinoid. And no, it's not THC. No, it's not CBD. It is beta-caryophyllene, so it's very different. But it has the same benefits as CBD and THC. So for those people who are not interested in cannabis, you don't need to go just getting CBD oil is no different than buying, be perfectly frank with you, buying a pharmaceutical, because the pharmaceuticals use the active ingredients that they find in the plants, and then everything else is pretty much the filler. And so taking CBD oil, it's a more natural form, but it's not necessarily doing much good for the whole body. It's just working on one particular gene complex, and therefore you're only working with one active ingredient. CBD is the converted fatty acid that is found in the raw cannabis plant. THC is actually a fatty acid until heated. So both CBD and THC are heated constituents, so that they break that, so the body doesn't have to break down the fatty acids. Cannabis is not recommended for anybody who has an endocrine system issue. I'm going to just put that out there, because adipose tissue helps to regulate appetite, and it also is insulin sensitivity. So insulin is produced by the pancreas, which is part of the endocrine system. Adipose tissue, as I've already said, is part of the endocrine system. And if you indulge in cannabis and you have an endocrine imbalance, you're setting yourself up for any kind of health condition at that point, and potentially weight gain. And it's not because you get the munchies. Well, it kind of is, but it's not because you get the munchies as much as it's not supporting the endocrine system appropriately. So another oil that actually is high in beta-caryophyllene, believe it or not, is black pepper. Black pepper has also been found to work with the major histocompatibility complex, which is it's a modulator for the immune system. So now we get into the autoimmune disorders. But before I go any further than that, like I say, black pepper essential oil is high in beta-carophylline, and so is copaiba. And these will actually help to soothe and help to soothe and offset any form of depression or anxiety. Styrax, also known as benzoin, is another one. Helps with the conversion from dopamine to norepinephrine, and it helps to reduce a lot of anxiety. And so that's an exceptionally good one for ADHD and anybody who just has a really difficult time focusing. And that can happen with depression. And again, with depression, you have nitric oxide synthase issues, and you possibly have estrogen metabolism issues because, especially if you're a male, which means you're not getting enough testosterone, which does affect memory. And we hear about that all the time when we're getting into our older age. So any other foods? I think we're covered on depression. Let's get briefly into autoimmune disorders. You want to really, autoimmune disorders, the way they approach it typically is to inactivate or suppress the immune system, because it essentially is, any autoimmune disorder is the body attacking itself in the tissues. I'm going to go right back to say this has to do everything with digestion. So your best start is to support a healthier digestive system. Again, unless you have indigestion and heartburn, I wouldn't worry about stomach acid as much as I would digestive enzymes. Can you use probiotics? Yes, you can use probiotics. However, please avoid, and this goes with anything at this point that I've talked about today, please avoid any foods that are histamine triggering, because, and like fermented foods, yes, we know fermented foods, we talk about body ecology. This is no disrespect to anyone who's promoting body ecology. I fully align with body ecology in the sense of overall health, but not in the sense of bioindividuality. And histamine is a major problem in this world. And the major histocompatibility complex is one of the most defective genetic complexes that European researchers have discovered. And the vitamin D receptor plays right into that. And now you have you've got too much histamine, you have an overactive immune system. To suppress the immune system is not beneficial. To modulate the immune system, on the other hand, is. Now, if you're in the throes of autoimmune disorder, I'm not telling you to bag any medications, because they've been doing you a world of good. But whatever you're taking is going to determine what oils you use, should this be a route that you would want to include in your wellness plan. So digestive tract on system, avoiding any high histamine foods like fermented foods, cured foods, foods with vinegar. But you do want to make sure you get your probiotics, and you do want to make sure you get your digestive enzymes. You also want to make sure that you take a quercetin supplement or some form of a full spectrum bioflavonoid supplement that does include quercetin in it. Oils that I've mentioned thus far throughout this video with regards to frankincense, black pepper, Roman chamomile. Another really exceptional one for the immune system is myrrh. Myrrh, interestingly enough, actually helps to regulate the thyroid. So if you have vitamin D challenges and you also have autoimmune issues, myrrh would be top. And then you have, oh my goodness, I had it and I just lost it. So I'll just keep talking and maybe it'll come out. So like I say, myrrh is a really good one. And that's a part of the reason, like I said, if you have vitamin D issues as well as autoimmune issues, it also affects the opiate receptors, which is really beneficial for anybody who's using painkillers and wants to stop using pain relievers in the throes of an autoimmune disorder. And German chamomile is another one that actually supports the immune system, and it actually helps to reduce yeast. But if you're taking an anxiolytic, you want to use caution with German chamomile, because they do contraindicate they counteract one another and they can actually create more anxiety. So that German chamomile is one you want to use with caution. And I think that's it for now as far as the oils. Like I said, I had it and then I lost it. So I'm going to say that it wasn't necessary at this point to talk about it. Helichrysum is a good one. It's also known as everlasting. That actually contains a constituent called 1,8-cyanol that works with the nitric oxide synthase gene, and it also helps with inflammation as well as a mucolytic. So if you have, so therefore it's working with the histamines. And again, autoimmune disorders are it's a very broad topic. But like I said, 75% of the patients living with autoimmune disorders are women, and that's any form of pain. It could be lupus, MS, and diabetes, RA. There's just too many. I want to say there's close to 80 different illnesses they've now categorized under autoimmune. So depending on what you present with, really is important, because more than likely if we're talking about autoimmune disorders with you, you're already living with some form of medication and looking for additional support. And that's possible, but at no point in time do you want to actually come off your medications. You want to make sure that you stay on them and that you can supplement with the oils and proper foods depending on what you're currently doing and what you present with. So if you have any questions, like I've asked you, please let me know. I'm happy to engage with you. If you want more specific information and more bio-individual information, by all means, contact me, and I will support you to the best of my ability. As you've witnessed here, I can go on and on and on about this. When I write it out, it helps. I can actually think about it more clearly, especially when it comes to you, as opposed to making this a broad topic. On that note, the same thing holds true for autism. Autism has been loosely tied to autoimmune, and everything that I've shared thus far in the area of oil selections, there again, it really depends on what your kiddo or what you present with, but this is all directly related. And I find it fascinating, and I really hope this finds you very well today. And I look forward to hearing from you. Until later, have a beautiful day. Bye now.